Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and Philistines, to another riveting episode of Krista's Fireside Lectures. I'm bringing you your 8th lesson in media skills, and it will be your second lesson in visual semiotics for the week. Now, if you guys remember what we did last lecture, it was, and I'm going to try and hope that you remember this, de Saussure is the theoretician that we studied, and he said that signs were dyadic. Two elements, two components. The signifier, which was the sign itself, and the signified, which is what the person who is looking at the signifier takes it to mean. The signified is what it refers to. Okay? And we said that the nature of the signs in our world were either polysemic, so with many meanings, or monosemic, with one meaning. And we also said that the grounds that we use to interpret signs can either be codified or uncodified. So there can either be a codified context in which we place that sign and we use that context to decide what the sign means, or there is no formalized context. There's nothing that we already know about it to determine what it means, and that is uncodified ground. Now, moving on from there, we're going to look at the semiotics of Charles Sanders Peirce. Please note the spelling of this guy's name, okay? The I doesn't come before the E in this instance. It's the other way around. Please note the spelling when you are doing your referencing in your assessments, because this is the kind of thing that you need to pay attention to. So Charles Sanders Peirce was another theoretician that looked at signs and semiotics, and he took it one step further. He took a look at de Saussure's work, and he said, well, actually, I think that signs are triadic. Okay, not dyadic, two, but triadic. In other words, three parts, three components, three elements in a sign. And he called them the denotatum, or the representamen, the object, and the interpretant. Now, similar to de Saussure's signifier is the denotatum. It is what is used to represent something, okay? The vehicle by which an idea is carried, okay? So the signifier, and the reason why he called it the vehicle by which an idea is carried to the mind is because he wasn't referring just to objects or to I don't know, words, or something that you can define. It could be anything. It could even be the shade of gray in the background of an advert, So it is a vehicle by which an idea is carried to the mind. De Saussure's dyadic theory sort of limits the way that we look at signs, and so his theory, where he uses the word signifier, limits what we can use, or limits how we view signifiers. We're looking at it in terms of pictures or words or sounds, but in actual fact, the way that Peirce approaches it is he reckons it can be anything that carries an idea to the mind. It can even be a smell, or the background noise in a theater. Anything can be a denotatum or a representamen. And those two words should give you an idea. It represents something. It represents an idea. Okay, the object is the literal thing that the sign refers to. So, say for example, you are walking down the street and you smell popcorn, and it takes you straight back to your first date that you had, in which you went to the movies with the boy and you sat and you ate popcorn. And that smell, when it catches you by surprise, it always takes you back there. So your denotatum would be your smell, the smell that wafts into your nose from the street. And the object is that experience that you had sitting in the movie theater, smelling the popcorn, being with that person. It's that memory. And then the interpretant is the result of the interpretation. So in that instance, the interpretant would be your re-experiencing of that memory and associating it, smelling it and associating it with that time, that experience that you had before. In another very more obvious example, take a pen. You look at the pen. The pen is the denotatum. It is the representamen. The object is whatever the pen is used to represent in the context. So if someone gives you a pen, then that pen is representing either signing or writing or something like that. So your object is the act of writing. It is the literal thing that pen represents. Either doing exams, obviously depending on the context, doing exams, or an exam paper, a form, a desk. But the interpretant is the result of the interpretation. It is your decoding of the sign. So again, depending on context, because you use codified ground to determine whether that pen is for signing a marriage register or writing an exam or making study notes, So whatever it is, the interpretant is very, it's polysemic, it's mutable. It is something that can change with the person because it is that person's interpretation of it. And remember that the object and the interpretation are different because, like I said before, I say tree and maybe I think of an acacia. Somebody else would think of a fir tree or a baobab or an elm tree, or an oak tree or a little baby tree sprouting from a pot. So the interpretant is the result of the interpretation, of the decoding of the sign. Okay, so that is the abstract concept that is sitting in between those two. It sits in between the denotatum and the object. And it's the abstract concept that is drawn from the person that is decoding the message, decoding the sign. Okay. So it demonstrates that the production of meaning is in fact an ongoing and possibly endless process. We experience this naturally in everyday conversation, and we can theoretically go on forever, because if I say one word and you associate it with something, then you can say that word and I can say no, but actually what I meant was something else. And depending on our contexts and how similar they are, your interpretant will either be wildly different or very, very much the same. So Peirce also said that there were 4 different types of signs. Okay, he said that there were arbitrary signs, iconic signs, symbolic signs, and indexical signs. So let's just go through these one by one. Your arbitrary signs are, for example, like language. There is no resemblance between the signifier and what it's signifying. And remember what we looked at in the first lecture where we looked at tree. The letter or the letters that are used to symbolize that thing have no actual resemblance to the thing itself. It is a sequence of letters that are used in a certain order, and if you know the language, then you can decode that word and you can come up with that thing that grows in the ground. So for this to work, people have to agree to the meanings of certain words before they can understand what those words mean. And of course, we look at like wicked, for example. Okay, that's a really good example because wicked originally meant awful and bad and evil. But these days, it is also used in slang to denote, cool. That is a wicked lick that you're playing on the guitar. It doesn't mean that it's terrible and evil, it means that it's awesome. So when slang develops in societies, it's because many people, have agreed that that word, the meaning of that word, will change slightly. And of course, when any language represents anything, you have to be able to learn it first before you can agree that that's what it'll represent. So, if you don't speak Greek, then, or if you don't read Greek, then you don't know what the letters represent and you don't know what sounds they make. And then you can't really learn it and know what the words are referring to in the language. So you have to learn that. It's arbitrary, it's not intrinsic, and there's no particular relationship between the sign and what it's referring to. Now, the second type is the iconic type of sign, and that resembles to a certain degree the object to which it refers. So, for example, a photograph or a video of you is an iconic sign of you. It's like your profile photo on Facebook. If you actually have a photograph of your face on Facebook, then that is an iconic sign that represents you. It's not you. Don't forget that signs represent things, and anything that is not actually you in the flesh is a representation of you. Okay. So it's not quite straightforward these days because images and pictures can be manipulated digitally, and these images are not necessarily real. Think about the filters that you get that you can use to make yourself look, 12 instead of, 52. So it's an iconic sign. It refers to you visually, but it's not actually real. It's not actually you. You don't look like that in real life. And that is simply because it's not you. It's a two-dimensional snapshot of what you could possibly look like. Okay, so it is iconic. Visual studies often acts as an interrogation of images in order to determine their applicability to culture and reality. And that is something that you have to think about. Looking back at our last lecture again, when I said, the silhouette of Che Guevara or the image of Che Guevara on a t-shirt, that's an iconic sign because it represents Che Guevara visually, but it's not actually him. It's also, it may not necessarily be applicable to culture and reality as we're experiencing it today, as an iconic sign of a real thing. It might more be an indexical sign or a symbolic sign of something else, an abstract concept, rather than an iconic sign of a real person. So your next type of sign is symbolic, a word or an image that stands for a larger body of ideas. And again, going back to that symbol, that silhouette, that sign of Che Guevara on a t-shirt. In terms of being an iconic sign, it represents him as a person. But he as a person is no longer relevant to our culture and our time and our context. But symbolically, as a sign, as a symbolic sign, he represents something else, a push against the traditional authority, a desire for freedom. Okay, and so that image as a symbolic sign stands for something. It stands for a concept, a body of ideas. Okay, their meaning would be arbitrary to an outsider, but through the investigation of the culture, one can make sense of them. So, if, for example, you were looking at something in the 60s or 70s, you often wouldn't find Che Guevara on t-shirts and, being featured like that. That sort of more featured, he featured more largely as a symbol, as a symbolic sign in the 80s and 90s that came out then. And you would have to understand the culture before you could understand that symbolic sign. Okay. Of course, we can also refer to things like Christianity, the crucifix. That is also a symbolic sign, because the crucifix refers to the entire Christian ideology. It doesn't just refer to, a cross on which somebody is nailed and left to die. Okay, so as a symbolic sign, the crucifix represents a whole body of ideas, an ideology. The South African flag also represents an ideology, the same way that your political party flags represent an ideology. And if you look at the hammer and sickle, that also represents an ideology. Okay, so a hammer by itself or a sickle by itself will represent something else, but when you see them crossed on a red background, that represents, again, that is a symbolic sign that represents a particular ideology. And of course, you get indexical signs, and there is a direct or physical or causal link between the signifier and the signified, what it's referring to. So, for instance, if you look at your exit, there will be a sign above the exit door with a person running down some stairs, or just a person running, and that means exit. There is a causal link between the sign and what it's referring to, which is the exit. If you look around in your room, you should find a fire extinguisher, and above the fire extinguisher will be a sign with a fire extinguisher on it. There is a causal link between the two. Okay, so in the same way, you can look at your your road signs. For example, the S with the line through it, that means no stopping. There is a causal link between that sign, which is an S with a line through it, that means no stopping, and that's on the side of the road where you're not allowed to stop. When you look at the weather will use a big sun with lots of rays coming out of it for a sunny day. But for a partly cloudy day, then it'll be a sun hidden by some clouds. And if it's rainy, then it'll be a bunch of little clouds with little raindrops coming out of them. And of course, we all know that that doesn't look like that in the real world, but it signifies a causal link. There is a direct physical link between that indexical sign and what it is referring to in real life. Even though it's stylized and it doesn't actually resemble what happens in real life, it's still something that shows quite clearly, and it's representative of a particular thing. Now, I don't know if you guys remember Roland Barthes. We spoke about him before, I think, in one of the previous lectures. But Roland Barthes was also a theoretician, and he looked at semiotics in, again, yet another way. He said that in terms of signification, there are different orders of signification. Firstly, you have your denotation, which is your literal meaning. And if we look at words, for example, you could look at the word, I don't know, bitch. Now, everyone, cover your mouth quickly and gasp in horror. I said it, I'll say it again. Bitch. The denotative meaning of the word bitch is a female dog, a female canine. So when we use the denotative meaning of bitch, we are referring to a female dog. Of course, you know, a male dog is called a dog. So we take a look at those two words. What are the connotative meanings of those two words, dog and bitch? If we look at the denotative meanings, going back a step, the denotative meanings of dog and bitch are male and female canine species. Okay? But then if we look at the connotation, or the way that we interpret those words based on context or tone or style of language, or even the people that we're with, we will associate different meanings to those words. So if you say to your friend, "Oh, he's such a dog," what does that mean? Does it mean that he is a member of the canine species? No. It means that he is a player. He is a guy that goes around with lots of women, tries to have as much sex as he can. You know, he's a dog. He goes and he humps what he can find. But if you look at the connotative meaning of the word bitch, it's very different. It doesn't mean the same thing in terms of connotation. If you call a girl a bitch, then, you know, back in the day, in my time, it meant that she was an unpleasant woman, an unpleasant girl. She was nasty or mean or, you know, just generally unpalatable in some way. Whereas nowadays, you know, rappers refer to bitches all the time, and then they're not referring to, you know, female canines, they're referring to women. Okay, so, and not necessarily that the women that they're referring to are, you know, unpleasant. It's most probably, especially if you look at the videos in which they feature those bitches, they're, you know, particularly nice. They're, you know, charming and affectionate and, you know, nice women. But it depends obviously on the context in which you are thinking about those words. If I spoke to a breeder of, say, German Shepherds, and I would say, that looks like a really good looking bitch, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm objectifying a woman. It means that I am admiring the breeding of her female canine. So denotation and connotation, practice that. Think of words. I'll give you a couple. So we've got bitch, we've got dog, we've got witch, we've got I don't know, fat, sick, hot, cool. So all of those you can look at in terms of denotative and connotative meaning and find that there is quite a distinct and clear difference. Okay. Now, the other orders of signification, the second order of signification that we look at, when we look at connotative meaning, there are other things attached to that. So myth and ideology and the symbolism attached to the connotative meanings of certain words. Again, when you say chicks are bitches, you look at the ideology that connotative meaning comes from. You look at the myths associated with that. So if you call a woman a bitch, what kind of associations are around that? It's not just that you're referring to a woman. It's a woman within a certain context and related to a certain group of ideas. Okay? And the symbolism there as well attached is determined by the context and the ideology that is attached to that word. And of course, that changes with time and culture, because if I called a woman a bitch back in the day, then I would mean that she was a mean girl. She was a horrible person. She was not pleasant. If you went, okay, she's a rich bitch, then it means that she is a rich woman who is obnoxious and self-regarding and arrogant and only cares about herself and has money to spend on whatever she wants and doesn't care about all of those people who are less fortunate than her, and is in fact oblivious to all of those people who are less fortunate than her. And that ties into an ideology of economics, of social elitism, and the symbolism there attached to things like furs and diamonds and expensive cars, and then attached to that as well is the notion of being a trophy wife and sugar daddies and all of those things. So it's not just, if I say rich bitch, it's not just about the type of person that's being referred to. There is a whole set of ideas and ways that we interact with each other and how things are symbolized in our world that's at play with those two words together, that descriptive term. And of course, the denotative meaning would be completely different. If we said that is a rich bitch, and we literally mean that is a female dog that has a lot of money. So it wouldn't really mean anything in terms of the literal or the denotative meaning, but the connotative meaning, the interpretation that we assign to that word or those words together as a descriptive term. On the second order of signification, we're looking at the ideology behind it, the social elitism, the selling out of one's person for the sake of money, for being rich, for being wanting to be, more fortunate than everyone else and believing that they're better than everyone else. Those are ideas. There's no denotation there, and it's not encompassed, or it's not implied simply by those two words, rich bitch, in the connotative meaning. It's implied, it's linked to a whole ideology, it's linked to a whole symbolism. So that's the second order of signification within a sign. And obviously, depending on the context in which you use that particular descriptive term or that word, there might be different ideologies attached. Okay. So, what do these signs mean? If you take a look at the one on the left is a swastika, but the denotative meaning is actually polysemic, because it originates from the Hindu traditions in which that symbol represents the eternal spiral of life. It's a very, very positive symbol in terms of the the denotative meaning, where it originates from and what people used it to symbolize. But then again, the Nazis also used that during and even before World War II to symbolize the Third Reich, which was the the oppressive socialist German regime under Adolf Hitler. So that symbol, being polysemic, refers to two different schools of thought, and very, very oppositional schools of thought. The one is positive, the other one is negative. And on a second order of signification, it refers connotatively to the idea that there is the superiority of a particular race. There is oppression of other races. There is, those ideas that the Nazis used to create their whole ideology. Those ideas are related to that sign on the second order of signification. If you take a look at the other one on the right, the skull and crossbones, that actually originated in, I can't remember if it was the 14th or the 15th century, when pirates used to, sail the high seas and basically hijack other ships and steal their cargo and recruit or kill all the people on board. So pirates used the skull and crossbones, and they called it the Black. They used it as a sign of a pirate ship. And of course you had different forms of skull and crossbones, but that's what it was. It was representative of a pirate ship, a skull and crossbones. In other words, there is death. Where we go, we take no prisoners, we kill, we take what we want. Okay, so the denotative meaning of that was the skull and crossbones. Obviously, as you can see, it refers to a skeleton and skeletal remains, which then was used to denote pirates. But the connotative meaning was, on a second order of signification, lawlessness, and also freedom, and also independence, because they didn't sail the high seas for the British Navy, and they didn't sail the high seas for the East India Trading Company. They did it for themselves. They didn't have, your sort of typical command structure. So it was freedom, it was independence, it was lawlessness to a certain degree, and that is the connotative meaning of that. Now, these days, you take a look at that, and where do you find it? You find it on bottles that are poisonous. So the sign has changed over the years. It's been appropriated and been made to signify something else. It still signifies death, but on a second order of signification, on a connotative level, it signifies death because, not necessarily because, that ship's got that flag, but because that bottle has got that sign. If you drink the stuff in there, you will die. Okay. So, in terms of semiotics as dialogue, context is very, very important. Your sign systems are hardly ever used in isolation. Okay? Meanings are inextricably bound to a larger picture or story, which is what we see here in this example, and both of these examples is your context is very different. If you saw this sign in a Hindu household, it would not mean that they are Nazis. And if you saw this sign in, a white supremacist household, it would not mean that they are Hindus. Okay, context is everything. Again, if you see this sign on somebody's bottle of, I don't know, rat poison or whatever, it doesn't mean that they're a pirate. So context is everything. You can't take a sign out of context, use it in isolation, and expect for that meaning to remain the same. Okay. Semiotic analysis is not, okay, this is really important, guys. You have to remember that semiotic analysis is not about whether you agree or like anything, but rather about how it is interpreted within a particular culture. Not necessarily even within your specific culture, but within the context that it is found, and with reference to the culture, in which it is found as well. The point is to look at the image or the sign as an observer. Keep your own opinions out of it unless they are called for, and go, what does this represent? It's not a good thing or a bad thing, and you're not being asked to make a value judgment. You're being asked to decide what it means. So when you're asked to decide what something means in your assessment, you don't have to go on a long rant about racism or gender-based violence or, other issues that are sort of pervading our culture today. It's not about the value judgment. If it's related to that, then yes, say it is related to that. But don't then go on about, what's happening in the world if it's just your opinion and if it's not part of your academic answer. Your academic answer needs to be free of value judgments. Okay. Semiotics, the study of signs and how we make meaning from them, is built on the assumption that we live in a world filled with meaning. And meaning is where intelligibility is maintained. Okay, so if we all agree that something has a meaning and it's the same kind of meaning, then it will be intelligible. We will be able to understand it. But if we don't see that particular sign as having the same meaning, then it will be unintelligible. We will not be able to understand it in the same way. So here are a couple of exercises. Take a look at this. Now look at it again. What is the signifier? Did you notice what it is? So if you take a look here, we have different elements within this image. This is called a visual text, okay? Now, within this visual text, we have the background, which is one element, it's one sign. Then we have the main focus, which is one more sign. Then we have this subtext, well, not subtext, this text here, okay, and this one here, and we've got another element here, and we've got one element here as well. Okay, so this main element here, what actually is it? Is it a gun? No, it's a car key. So the signifier is, or one of the signifiers in this visual text is this car key here. And what is it signifying? It's signifying a gun. Okay? So ask yourself, why does this car key look like a gun? Why are they saying this? And what are they really saying when they make this car key look like a gun? We have to look at it in terms of what it represents to us. So, remember what we were speaking about at the beginning of the lecture, where when we looked at guns before, we said that before, back in the day, it used to represent security and safety and independence. And these days, with the gun-free agenda that's being very strongly pushed by a lot of people in Europe, and also it's filtering into the South African politics as well, our associations with guns have changed. So now we look at handguns as being threatening and taking lives all the time. Okay, but what takes more lives than guns? And that is cars. So this is the second, well, these are the second and third elements which help us to explain or to relate what is going on with the signified in this element here. It says, takes one life every 25 seconds. Okay? And drive safe. So, that gun, which is actually car keys, takes one life every 25 seconds. Okay? According to the World Health Organization fact sheet from March 2013. Cool. So, kills more people than guns is basically what they're trying to say. But how are they saying it? They are using a car key to signify a gun, which means that your car is a weapon. Okay? And when you are texting and driving on the freeway, then it causes paraplegic bikers or dead bikers or other dead people. So, I'm just like slotting it in there just because I have my own personal agenda to push as well. Okay, so how are they saying this? By using these different elements that signify something. And if you take a look here, and if you have really, really bad eyesight and you can't see that this is a car key, but you know that this says takes one life every 25 seconds, you might be tempted to use these two signifiers together to interpret them to mean, to signify that guns take one life every 25 seconds. But then you need to look at this third element here and go, okay, hold on a minute. Drive safe means this refers to a car key, and this refers to people with cars. Cars take one life every 25 seconds. Okay, so cars don't kill people, people kill people. And so what are they really saying? Drive safely. Make sure that you don't use your car like other people use guns. Okay. And of course, you can use de Saussure's theory to, and as we have done here, to deconstruct this visual text, or you can use Charles Sanders Peirce's theory to deconstruct the visual text. And in fact, it might actually be even more useful to use Peirce's theory because it's triadic and it gives you more depth, which means you are able to find more meaning in that, or link up more meaning in each of these elements. Okay, so now I'm going to give you guys that one to do. And what you need to do is look at this Old Spice advert, okay? Smell like a man, man. Look at the Old Spice advert. Look at all of the different elements. Remember that this smell like a man, man, is one element. Old Spice, the logo, is another element. The horse is another element. the product image that he's holding is another image. And of course, the man himself is another element. So, and then the background as well. So take a look at all of these things. Those are all different signifiers within the visual text. What are they each signifying? And together, what are they signifying? Why does this thing look the way it does? Why are they saying this? What are they really saying? Think about that. Pause the video now. Decide what your answers are. Write them down. Put them on Call Campus, because it's a good way to bounce your ideas off someone and see if what you are saying makes sense to other people. And if you need help, this is who you can call. Please take care, stay safe, ask the questions, stay cool, love you, bye.